Welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion of the Luciferian system. And as you might remember the last time, if you watched, we talked about how it's broken down into three basic areas. Finances, which deal with the body, how you get food and things you need to maintain your physical existence. Education, that's the system that's going to control what you think, how you perceive the world, how you look at things, whether it's God, it's other people, everything. It's controls the mind. That part of the system is going to control the mind. Then the last one's going to be religion, where it's going to bring in about a system that works to honor and lift up Lucifer. That's Lucifer's religious system is all about taking everything God created and being in control of it to the point that he's lifted up above God. That's so. Now, the great thing about this, if you look in the initial temptation to Eve, that's exactly what he appealed to her. He said, look, here's this fruit. If you eat this fruit, yeah, God's saying you're going to die. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is your eyes are going to be open and you'll know good and evil and you'll be like God. And what the scripture tells us is Eve looked at the fruit and she said, it's pleasant to the senses. It pleases the body. It would be good to eat. That's what she looks at. And then as far as her mind, it's like, oh, it's going to make me wise. It's going to give me knowledge that I can operate and organize the world around me under me. And that's great because that's what the scripture even says. Knowledge puffs up. It raises you above. It can do that. It can also make you humble because as you start to understand you really know nothing other that God is where it's at. It can make you humble, but many times it lifts people up like the appeal of it did to Eve. And then it appeared to the soul because now she would be God. She would be like a God. She wouldn't be a servant to Adam. She wouldn't be a servant to anybody. See, she would be in a relation like we talked before, where she would be at the top and everything under her would be lesser than her. And that's the vertical system we talked about, which Lucifer wants to employ upon the whole world so that he's lifted up and everything's under him. Okay, now we're going to continue to talk a little bit about finances today, but we're going to try to relate it a little bit to the other systems if we can. Okay. Now, I drew on here something that might scare a lot of you because I did a market graph. And then I've got relational markets. And then on one side, I have capitalism, and on the other side, I have communism. Now, market systems are uniquely distinct from capitalism and communism. They may take aspects of markets and try to use them or distort them to the goal of whoever is intending to distort. Here, Lucifer, through the politicians and the people who are wealthy and all of this, which hopefully at some other point we'll get into the discussion of who those people are. But if we go back to our discussion of money and what money is money is a way to facilitate a trade. Remember how we started out in a couple episodes ago where we talked about initially how did people trade? Well, they bartered. They didn't have any money. That idea of money came in through Azazel, as we know in the book of Enoch. So, but before that, what did you do? Well, you went out and you knew you needed some things to eat or you needed some tools or whatever you needed to exist, physically to exist. You knew that. You knew you were not self-sufficient since the fall. You knew that the earth just didn't produce trees, that you just reached up and grabbed an apple and went on your merry way. You now the ground's cursed, and you knew it was cursed, and you knew that you would have to mix your blood, sweat, and tears with the soil to produce something. And you also knew you couldn't make it on your own. So you needed to look at your fellow human beings, and you needed to say, okay, we have to form some sort of relationship here where I help you and you help me. And it's got to be mutually beneficial. It can't be where I take advantage of you, because this is, in its basic sense, this is one person looking at another person. It's not where you go and buy something online. You don't know who the people are you're buying from or anything. Maybe you can look at how many stars they got or whatever, or their reviews. But initially, what was it? Well, you looked at somebody and they looked at you, and you said, hey, I can help you here with my back, my labor, if you give me part of the produce you're producing. And you looked and you struck an agreement. You know, how many apples you were going to get for working that day, or whatever whatever the trade was. And so it was eye on eye. It was relational. It was personal. It was very personal. And if that person you're looking at didn't give you the apples, you think you're ever going to trade with him again? No, you're not ever going to trade with him again. And do you think he's going to be able to trade with this person or that person after you tell about, oh yeah, Joe didn't give me the apples that I worked for? No, he's going to have a hard time. So people were tied together in this relational system. Money changed all of that. Money made it possible for people to trade in a way where they didn't have to look at each other, and they didn't have to know each other. They could become very impersonal, and that changed everything. And so we went from this relational market, this relational bartering system, because when money came in, you could still do the market, because maybe you and Joe looked at each other and you said, okay, I don't know how many apples I'm going to give you, but I'll tell you what, I'll give you $10. You looked at it and said, well, you know, from guy over next down the road, I could buy 20 apples for $10. Good deal. I'll take your $10, because I can go down the street and buy the 20 apples I need. Because maybe you don't even have apples, but you'll give me $10 for doing something that I could use to buy the 20 apples. So there was still that connection, that personal connection. It wasn't impersonal. Well, that definitely was not going to serve the Luciferian system, because it was personal. It was a relationship among people in a tight-knit community that could not screw each other and get away with it. Okay, we come up later with laws to say you can't screw each other, or you can't take advantage of each other, you can't steal, you can't do this, you can't do that. Well, these laws are in place basically because this breaks down at a certain level. And so we have the laws in place to enact that. Well, now let's talk about something and how it relates to the capitalism versus communism. If you were growing up in China, say you're 40 years old and you had grown up in China, would you have heard about communism? Yeah, in fact, your system would have been under communism. Would you have heard of capitalism? Probably. Okay. Which do you think you would have heard positive things about? Communism or capitalism? Probably about communism. probably would have heard negative things about capitalism. What would you have heard about capitalism? Well, the wealthy own everything and they enslave the masses. And they get them to work for them for nothing. And then the owner of the business lives in the big house and all of this kind of stuff. And, that's just the way it is. And we don't want this because we'll hold all things in common and we'll distribute things equitably or fairly among each other. Now, if you grew up in my generation, you would have went to school. Here in America, you would have heard about communism, you would have heard about capitalism. But what do you think you would have heard? Would you have heard that communism's a good thing? No. Would you have heard that capitalism's a good thing? Oh yeah, capitalism's wonderful. It raises the standard of living and everything. It's just a beautiful system. And it's a fair system because if you work hard, you'll make it. You'll get ahead and everything like that. And communism, it enslaves. You would have heard that in communism, the people at the top live in mansions, and the people at the bottom struggle to make ends meet. Well, see, what do we have today? Well, we're actually having where people in China are revolting to go to this system, and the people here among the youth are revolting against this to go to this system. Now, I'm going to tell you something very shocking. There's not really any difference between this system and that system. They're both part of the Luciferian system. Oh, no, that can't be right because, see, I grew up being taught that this was right. Just like I grew up with certain religious truths being taught me. Okay. Again, see how it's starting to tie together? This is all geared to control your body, your mind, and your soul. That's what this is. It's very deep and much darker than we're aware of. Now, we're going to become aware of it in the increasing days and months ahead. We're going to become more aware of it. What we're trying to do is wake people up right now to become aware of it, that they can't really trust too much what they're being told about finances, what they've been told, or their education, and to a large extent, they can't believe too much that's going on in the religious systems. Now, what can you believe in? Let's go to relation. What's important to God? Is it that you follow a bunch of rules? Is it that you adopt one of these systems and you deal with people honestly in that? Is that what's important to God? Did he send his son to shed his blood, die on a cross, so that we could live within one of these systems, prospering? Is that what he died for? Or did he die for a relationship with him? See, that's what's important. It's always been that important. We've just been kind of led away from that through finances, the prosperity gospel, education. Oh, let's get a degree in Greek, because if we know these scriptures really well, and we study them and we make them into a religious system, we're way ahead of everybody else. See, this is how dark it is, because at the bottom line, Christ died to be in relationship with you and you with him back here, to create a community of people in relationship with him and in relationship with each other. And when that happens, what happened? We read in Acts. See, and this is how diabolical Lucifer is, because we read in Acts, when these people came together, did their money matter to them? No, the people in the church. Their family mattered to them, to the point that those who had capital over here had money, had land, had things of value. They sold those things so that they could give them to the poor so that everybody would have something. Say, relational. Now, what Marx, who is credited with, which that's even a little bit suspect, with bringing about Marxism or communism. He went to school initially to be trained in religion, and actually, I think when he saw Acts, he thought, "Oh, that's the way it should be." Okay, and I believe he was a rascal and all of that. We won't get into that, but he traded upon that euphoric kind of place where everybody held things in common and they all got along. See, people want that. Well, why did the church have it? Because of the power of the Holy Spirit, not because of some system imposed on the people by the higher ups. No, see, but it had an allure, it had an appeal, especially to poor people who saw that they worked all day and didn't have enough to eat, didn't have enough to take care of themselves, and they saw people living in big houses that owned the factories, whatever. Okay. Now, so I think here in the West, if you've grown up in our system, you can kind of understand the problems of this. But let's look at capitalism, because capitalism is not a market system. It tries to present itself as a market system. But let me give you an observation of mine when I was a young man, actually a child. I remember living in a neighborhood. My mom and dad were like worker bees, they worked for other people, and they both worked, and together they were able to buy a house in this one subdivision where it was a nice house. It wasn't the biggest house in the subdivision, wasn't the best house in the subdivision, but it was in the subdivision. Guess who else had houses in that subdivision? Doctors, lawyers, people who today, do they live in the subdivisions where the average worker lives? No. Why? See, what changed? I can remember, and you can see this in an old town. If you go to the old part of town, where you go down the main street or the street where all the big houses are, and you look at the big houses there, the guy that started this business or the guy that ran the bank or this or that, and you look at those houses and they look, they're nice and they're big, especially if they've been taken care of. But you start to realize, they're a lot bigger than the workers' houses. But there's not that much difference. In fact, a lot of the workers now own those houses. Where are the factory workers? Well, they're in gated communities. They're in places where they don't have to mix with the riffraff. And we're told that what happens is they start a factory, and it's so much better than everybody else that their business grows to a place where then they are, like this big tech company. We're told that Bill Gates sat in his little garage and he comes up with, "Oh, I think I know an operating system. And I've come up with one, and I'm going to call it Microsoft, and I'm going to bring that to the world." And everybody who saw it says, "Oh, it's better than Linux. It's better than this." And everybody wanted it, to the point everybody said, "Oh, we got to have this." And that somehow Bill Gates becomes one of the richest men in the world because he had an idea that I can guarantee you a lot of other people had an idea better than his. But we're told because of this market system, somehow he rose to the top. And he now controls the word processing systems. Try to buy a computer, it doesn't have Microsoft on it. You can get them, but you pay through the nose. He puts that system on there not necessarily to sell the system, but to control everything else. How did that happen? Where did he get the capital to make this? From, remember how he talked about the cabal, the bankers, the Federal Reserve, the politicians that are in cahoots with that? They choose people and they install them. You really think that these guys that started Facebook and all of these companies, that they had such a great idea that all of a sudden they control a whole market? You think that happened naturally through these eye-to-eye dealings? No way. If you believe that, you're if I had some, if you know, I could tell you I'll sell you the Brooklyn Bridge, okay? Because if you believe that, you'll tend to believe about anything. It didn't happen that way. This has been orchestrated. Because guess what? And I'm going to get to this, and this, stay with me because this loses people, okay? In a market system, I got this graph drawn here, and I've got quantity over here. It's graphed on this side and price, and then I've got two lines. One is the supply line, and the other one's the demand line. Okay, so let's look at it, you and me. Okay, and I've got some apples now. I'd love to sell you these apples for this price over here because it's a lot. Okay, I could probably, this price here, there's probably somebody out there that's not too bright or money doesn't matter to them that I could sell an apple to for $10. I'd love to sell you apples all day for $10 each. But you're sitting there and saying, well, you know, if an apple's $10 and I can get an orange for 50 cents, I'm not going to buy an apple. So your demand, as the price goes up, that higher apple, it goes down. You choose something else, or you get away from Hesh because he's nuts about selling these apples for $10. So see, what happens is in a perfect market, where buyer and sellers have perfect knowledge and look at each other and they're not manipulated by any of this stuff up here, we get to a place where there's an equilibrium and the certain amount of quantity is sold for a certain price. Guess what? When that happens, everybody who thinks apples are worth buying at this price gets an apple. Everybody that says, man, that's too much for apple, they just leave the market anyway. It's like my $10 example. You just say, I'll get oranges or I'll get away from Hesh. Okay. When this happens, that price in quantity, that price, when it clears the market, there's no profit. There's a return to capital. So if you bought a piece of land with some apple trees on it, you know, you're going to eventually get back the price of that land. But you're not going to make what we're going to call an economic profit. Because as soon as profit gets into the market, people enter the supply and it shifts this cord, this line over here. Same way with demand, it shifts it upward. So if a market's fluid and it's based upon me making a decision, you making a decision, and it's not been futzed around with this system up here, You never accumulate enough capital to control a market like these tech companies. You never get to the place where you can tell computer manufacturers, you either put my software in every one of your computers or you're not getting it at all. You get to a place where the profit center of a company isn't their law firm that goes around, looks for people who have better ideas, and then sues them for patent infringements until they extract from them the good ideas. You don't get to that in a perfect market. Because in a perfect market, one of the rules of a working market that's working is no single producer or no single person of demand, neither one of these gets so big that they can control this market. Well, today, all the all the produce, all the cattle, everything that the farmers produce, how many people do you think there's buying that? Now, you'll have little markets like where the farmer down the street produces something, puts a little stand outside and sells them direct to the people. You might have a person who raises cattle do the same thing. That's what we're going to return to. Believe me, we're going to return to that. But what do you have? No, you have, we call it cash crops. See, farmers produce what? By and large, what do they produce? They produce goods for mass consumption. They produce field corn. Why? So it can be turned into corn syrup and all of fructose, all of this kind of stuff. It can be used in grain products, and it's bought by literally, ultimately by, I think it's like 3 major corporations. They buy all of that, and guess what? Those same corporations, they have divisions that sell the seed to the farmers, and they sell the fertilizer, and the seed they sell to the farmers. You think that farmer can take that ear of corn and take the seeds off of the corn and plant them in the ground, produce another crop? No, the seeds they sell them produce one crop and then it's sterile. That's what they've done. They've created a system where now the farmers who used to be able to plant their crops and then keep back a certain amount of the seeds or the corn kernels, that would be the seeds, whatever the seeds are, and plant them next year to produce a crop. They can't do that anymore. They're dependent upon buying their seed from these mega corporations that in turn just turn around and buy all of their goods from them. See how they're, and we've been told that this is a great system. No, this is a system that financially and through corporations controlled by the people at the top, this Luciferian system. That's what's happening here. And I know it's shocking to think that, but what we need to do is start opening our eyes, because over here, those in charge of this system are those who are in charge of the money or the capital. How much capital you got in the bank? How powerful are you in this system compared to people that are worth billions and billions of dollars that they report? Because we could get into this and show in our national budget the money we spend. We don't know where a lot of it goes. These people at the top are a lot wealthier than we are told. That's why they're in this, to protect the system. That's why they're going crazy. That's why they'd start a war. That's why they do all of this crazy stuff. This is why they have no problem in not listening to you, but doing whatever they can and whatever they want to keep the system in place. That's what's happening here. Communism, who is in control of the law or the politics is in control? Well, both of these systems require not only control, but require enforcement. Isn't that interesting? How our founding fathers, especially George Washington, said the death of America can come when we get into foreign entanglements. He says, we have no business going any place around the world and starting wars for an ideology. Yet that's what we're being told today. We got to go to Ukraine. We got to get the draft going. We got to get people to send over there and fight the Russians. You think that if we do that, the Russians are just, oh, America's entered the battle, they're sending troops? Well, no. The war will just escalate. And that's what they intend to do because they're losing control in the media and some of these things. People are revolting against the educational systems because of the nonsense these schools are telling the kids. People are revolting against this. People are even revolting against the religious system. And actually the Spirit's there. The Spirit is in revolt against these mega systems of religion, where there's no personal religion for most people. There's a relationship where I better do this, and I got to do this, and I got to do that. All of that's being fallen apart. It's going to fall apart because the system's going to fall apart before what happens next. And perhaps we'll talk about that in a later time. But until then, I would just lift up my prayers to you and for you and your family. I would ask that all eyes be opened to the mind behind what we see, because whatever you see, there's a breath behind it. There's a spirit behind it. Our discernment is to say, is that God's spirit or is that some other spirit? That's what we're supposed to do. Every thought we have, we're to take captive. We're to say to ourselves, is this thought from God or is this thought from his enemy who's trying to destroy me? So my prayer is that your eyes be opened to this. I know it's scary, but we don't have to be afraid because we have Jesus. So, again, until we meet again, blessings to everyone on the other side of the screen, and shalom.